down the background color. You want to wet your brush first. I'm cheating and using a nice paintbrush. If you have a 1-inch brush at home and want to use that instead of the sponge brush, you can go right ahead and do that. First, I dipped my brush into water, patted it on the edge of the paper towel, and now I have some paint loaded onto my brush, not fully loaded. You can see just the top portion of my brush. And I'm going to stroke up and down. Now, if you were able to join us for the last class, we talked about working in a circular motion. Today's painting is going to have a lot of up and down to give this really beautiful vertical composition. And I'm just stroking white. You can tell where you painted because it's going to be bright and shiny. And I'm just stroking white, as you can see, about 2/3 of the way down the canvas. And I'm just going to keep dipping it into the white, and I want to coat and cover as much of the canvas as I can. Occasionally go back in, even before you dip in paint, and add a little bit of water. You don't want to see drips pouring down your canvas, but you want to have the white starting to work down about 2/3. And if you stand to the side, you can see the shine, and you can tell where you haven't coated your canvas yet. So, and it doesn't matter if you extend the white below, but we're going to keep close attention to that dividing type line. And I'm just going to keep stroking and making sure it's covered uniformly. You don't want any globs of paint or any runny paint. So if it's loose on one side, dip your brush directly in paint and thicken that area up. And then I'm also going to pay attention to my sides of my canvas. I'm going to do the same thing to the sides that I did to the surface and put white paint all the way up and down the side. Okay. For the top, you can lift your canvas up and you can go like this and just kind of go back and forth across. You want to have paint all the way around the edges. This is a wrapped canvas. And if you have a wrapped canvas, you don't necessarily have to go and purchase a frame for it. Your edging can act as a frame. And if you carry your design onto the edges, it gives it a beautiful finished look. So again, I'm going to hold my canvas and just work my brush along the edges to coat all the way down. And I'm going to bring the white all the way down to the bottom. But I want you to be mindful of where we were with our 2/3, because we're not going to have bright dark colors in the top section of the painting. The thing that makes the tulip heads really pop is the contrast of the bright colors against the dark. I'm sorry, against the light. So I have at this point coated my entire surface with white. I know you're wondering, when's it going to get exciting? Where's the color coming? This is when we're going to start now adding color. So for anyone who joined us after we began, right now what we've done is we've worked on using the white paint, using our thicker brush. If you have a sponge brush, pause in the activity to retrieve. Okay. The fun thing about a Zoom is you have to be flexible, and we are. So I'm just propping it right back up, showing you again what we were working on was putting a thin coat of white paint across the entire canvas. We don't want it to be drippy or runny. We also don't want it to be lumpy or have blobs of paint anywhere particular. So my canvas is completely coated, and now I'm going to be really bold and I'm going to start adding color. And to do that, the top portion is going to be primarily purple. So you can take your purple cup, you can use your brush to scoop some out onto your palette, just a little bit like this, okay? And I'm going to put that right onto my palette. And I want just the tiniest bit of purple. So I'm going to just use my edge and kind of do a little bit of streaking up and down on the canvas like this. And then I'm going to go back and forth, and I'm going to do up and down strokes all the way across and work this color that we just put on into the white. And you want to stay light. You don't want to add a whole lot of color. You want it to be light and pastel looking. And we kind of want to leave a little bit of the vertical stripes, but not have it overpower. So every now and then, I might go back in with my brush and put a little touch of white. So as you can see, everything is staying vertical. There's no circular motion. If your brush is dragging on the paint surface, just dip it in water and you'll see it start to glide again. So I'm doing the sides as well. I'm very consistently covering the sides. I'll show you here what it looks like. I just have some light purple on the sides. I'm going to do the same thing at the top where I go back and forth and just drag back and forth to get that color across the top of my canvas. So it's a little hard. It depends on the camera and it depends on your device, how well you're going to be able to view the differences in the colors. We did some tests here, and we have a Chromebook, we have a laptop, and sometimes you see the colors looking really bold in your image, and sometimes it can look very muted and uniform and not show just how much depth or change of color you're having in your work. So I'm going to keep working my brush up and down. This is really important. The background lays the foundation. And again, it's the contrast that's going to look really beautiful. So I don't want to overload with color. All right, I've done my top and my one side. I'm just going to flip my canvas so I can paint some lavender on the opposite side. I'm trying not to step in front of the camera, so you'll see me work upside down on occasion so that I'm not blocking anyone's view stepping in and out. If your stripes are very streaky, again, touch the tip of your brush into your water, and that will help you spread the color up and down the canvas. We also want to be careful that it doesn't dry and show the canvas pattern. And you simply do that by wetting your brush and layering in some more paint, whether it's white or lavender. So you see, I'm really just working my brush up and down, up and down. And this is such a beautiful color, wonderful shade of purple. We're using dioxazine purple, which for some reason was really challenging to acquire at Michael's. There are some paint shortages. I don't know if it's related to shipping issues or just more folks doing craft work at home. So I have this beautiful uniform shades of purple. I'm going to go in now and I'm going to put more purple on the corner of my brush and do some more bold streaks. But I'm going to be very modest in my approach to adding color. I don't want to overload right off the bat. You can always lighten. I'm sorry, you can always darken, but it's much more challenging to lighten. So I've got some bolder stripes going up and down. I want to go a little bit darker. I tend to like to make my sides slightly darker than the center of my image. So I'm adding more color along the side. It's a really, really pretty shade of purple. I hope everybody's enjoying the purple. And I'm going to, now that I have a pretty even and I'm happy with the amount of mix in here, I'm going to go ahead and flip it, and I'm going to work on the bottom of the canvas. Now, if you're working at your table and it's flat, you don't have to do the flip. But I'm going to do the same thing where I have white, but I'm going to add a lot more purple. And I'm going to keep dipping my brush in and out of the water because I want it to glide smooth across the canvas. And if you're just using straight paint, I think you're going to have a hard time. You're going to feel a tug and a pull. And you want to try and avoid that by having the brush glide smooth. So you can see, if you look here, I'm building up darker across 1/3, and that's actually going to be the bottom of the canvas. But right now, I have mine flipped. Again, I'm trying to minimize how often I'm in front of the camera obstructing your view. So it's a little repetitious at this point. We're just going back and forth, adding the violet, and then bringing in some white. Once this is done, this area that we worked on first is going to be starting to dry, and that will give us the option to go in and work on our tulips. But we want the background pretty well fleshed out before we do that. So you can see when my brush is not wet that it leaves a much stronger indication of color, and I want to soften that up. So that's when you go back in and wet your brush and just work it back and forth. So right now on your palette, you really just have the purples, different shades of purple that you're working up and down. And if you want more color in your bottom part, very lightly put some streaks and then touch your white and keep going back and forth. I'm going to leave some of the white really strong white. I'm not going to have it fully blended everywhere because I like that bit of texture. So sometimes you might take the edge of your brush here and just do a streak of white here and there so that you have an undiluted streak of white going up and down. And you can do the same thing with the purple on the bottom. If you hold your brush perpendicular to your canvas and just do some strong streaks like this, back and forth to get a little bolder approach of the purple. And like I said, I like to do that on the outer edges, left and right side, just to give it a little more dimensionality. And I think I didn't put color on my bottom. So I'm going to go now while I'm doing the darker colors, and I'm going to touch color along the bottom. It's easy to forget one edge when you're working back and forth on it. And be careful, you can pull some of the color from the edge. You want to keep your brush moving quickly back and forth across the canvas until this whole surface is now coated. I'm still going to put a little more dark in here. And then we're going to do something really fun. We're going to break out of this and we're going to start to mix purple and green together. And this purple, think about it, is red and blue, and the green, the phthalo green, is a yellow and blue. If you have blue being part of both of them, and I'm really not even washing my brush. I just dipped my brush in the blue and I'm dipping it in the purple. And on my palette, I'm going to mix together blue and purple. And I want it to look equal amounts of blue and purple. I'm sorry, green and purple. But it's going to be a blue. And we can see the blue if we add some white. Right away, you'll start to see that it actually has this beautiful turquoisey blue going on. And I'm going to start to mix some of the blue that I made from mixing the purple and the green, I'm going to kind of streak that a little bit on here as well now. This is my bottom. I'm working on the bottom upside down. I'm keeping it in where the dark purples are that I put. And I'm just kind of putting a little bit here and there. I don't want it to be too dark because you're going to need to be able to see the leaves showing up. So I'm going to lighten it a little bit. And I did that just by putting white on the tip of my brush like this, a little bit of white. And again, you want to work straight up and down. If it's pulling, don't hesitate to put a little water on your brush. Okay. Yep. So if you look at what I had worked on as an experiment, I have this beautiful teal kind of color along the side here, and that's a mix of green and white, but then adding a dab of purple. And it creates such a beautiful shade of blue. And I have a pretty good buildup now across the bottom of my painting. I'm going to flip my painting, and I want to see just a hint of some of these colors across the top. Very, very lightly. I'm just going to touch a little bit and bring in some of these colors here. And then I'm going to go right to the white and smoothen it out with some white. If your brush has too much dark paint in it, that's when you need your paper towel. And I'm going to get more white onto my palette. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'm just smoothing out and lightening up, keeping my top nice and pastel-y so that when I do put my tulips in, they're going to be bold against the contrast of this. So at this point, it almost looks like little licks of fire down here in purples and greens, and there should be some blue. Make sure, check your sides, your top and bottom, make sure that you put color all across your piece. I'm going to just check over here. I might not have done, oh, I got it. Okay, so we have a really nice mix across the bottom, and then we have this beautiful pastel-y, kind of resembles if you were looking through a window and you were seeing the rain and the little rivulets of water coming down on a window pane. I need this area to be dry. You can always use a paper plate. Go ahead and fan it and help speed along the drying process. Now I have on my original piece 6 tulips. You're welcome to do 3 tulips. You're welcome to do a whole field of tulips. The design here is very linear and more like a row of tulips as opposed to a flower bed or an open field of tulips. But you can do whatever you would prefer if you're enjoying the tulips. And while we're waiting for everything to be dry, you should have another paper plate in your pack. We're going to practice the tulip first on a paper plate. And the reason for this is to give you some more confidence when it comes time to put your tulips right onto the canvas. So in your bag, you will have received a small angle brush. It points towards the edge. And I'm going to scoop a little bit of purple onto my brush and just bold. You want to take your brush and go back and forth across the palette so that it's like you're stroking the color onto your brush. And this way you won't have big lumps of paint. If you hold your brush sideways, you don't want to see little balls or globs of paint hanging on your brush. And the reason for that is as you're pressing down, those little bumps of paint could squeeze out and make your flower look bumpy. So I have a paper plate and I'm going to hold my angle brush, the longer tip of the angle facing away from me. And I'm going to start and just come down and pull over, making like a U. And I'm going to do the same on this side and pull over. And this is giving you the base for your tulip. And right there, I've just created my first tulip. I'm going to do the same thing a couple times just to get a good feel. If you look, I have one that's a little fatter. So you could come over and make a bigger, deeper, shallow tulip. And you just stroke down to fill in. And already it's looking like a tulip. And you can leave the edges uneven because we're going to have some get little round bumps and some are going to have a full top. And you have the choice of how you want each of your tulip tops to look. And then if you want to practice a little one, I would just say kiss the brush against the palette and pull down and do it again. And now we have like a little tulip over here. And just practice on the paper plate a couple times until you feel like you like the shapes you're making. And again, I'm just pulling down for one side, pulling down for the other, and then pulling the color in between. My brush is a little funky and it's giving me hairs on my tulips. That's not fun. So I'm going to smooth them out. So this is how we practiced. We're going to look at the canvas and we're going to decide where we're putting our tulips. I need to get some more purple paint onto my palette. And I'm going to take a small amount of purple paint on my brush. Like we talked about, where you stroke your purple back and forth across, and I'm going to mix some of that with white to get what I'm going to use to create my first tulip. I'm not going to use straight purple. I'm going to use a mix of purple and white together to start laying down my tulip shapes. Okay, so I know I want a little tulip over here like a bud, and I'm just going to pull it down. And you can see that's not a strong contrast to the background, but that's okay. We're just kind of filling in placement right now. I'm going to do a larger tulip right next to that one here. And I'm pulling down and pulling down. So giving myself an indication of where they're going to be. All right. And the nice thing is we can always make them bigger and fatter. Can't make them smaller, so don't go too big too fast. I had another one right about here. Little guy here. And then I'm going to do a fat one over here. So I'm marking where my tulips are going to be placed. All right. I'm going to do another fat one here. And I think I will put a small one right here. So you can see I varied from the original, and you can as well. So I have large and small tulips. I have one going much higher than the others. You don't want them all to be uniform in a row at the same exact size and height. And you don't want them all to be the same width. So I'm trying to make this one stand out as a little bit wider than the others. So I'm going back in and indicating a little more width. My brush is getting really like tugging and pulling, which means I need to add a little bit of water. And now here I have this other tulip here. I like that size and shape. I think I'm going to be really wild, and I'm going to put a second small one right here. How daring is that? Okay, so I've indicated where my tulips are going to be. And then I'm going to use my brush to start to create petals. And I have this here was my sample plate. Here I just did one large petal and left a darker space in the back here. Over here, I just did a hint of a petal on this side. Same thing here. So in order to do that, you'll kind of make a stroke and indicate where your petal is going to be. And you leave the outside line nice and bold and dark, so that helps clarify that's going to be a petal. And you're going to play back and forth with the paint on your palette, and you're going to use the bold dark purples for some edging, and then we're going to use white for some. And I'm going to keep working on the petals now and just kind of designating where there might be individual petals. Now, the one thing you're going to want to watch is that you don't do all of them exactly the same, because uniformity is already taking place in the verticalness of this image and in the colors. So I don't think it'll be as aesthetically pleasing if every single one of them has a big middle petal and then 2 little side petals. So vary it up. And this is going to take a little while. Just go in, create individual petals by using darker and lighter shades of the purple. You can make them taller as you go. You can decide you want to make them narrow. And I'm just bouncing back and forth between adding white to make some petals stand out and then a darker purple to delineate where the edges of the petal might be. And the nice thing is it's all wet right now. So if you're not happy with one color, you can certainly go back, add a little more onto your brush and darken up whatever you've just done. What's going to be fun here is we're going to add some of the blue at the end, the bluish green into the petals, and we're going to add some of the green into the purple. So it's a really nice mix. Anybody have any questions? You can unmute and ask questions at any point in time. Tulips don't necessarily have a base like a rosebud or a sunflower. So you want to kind of keep the center of your bottom of each tulip straight across, nice and even. So you can see I'm just adding, I have white on the very, very edge of my brush just by tipping it like this. And I'm just adding a little bit of white onto some of them. But again, I'm being careful not to do the same thing on each one so that it doesn't look repetitive. Okay. We didn't put any music on today. If you're home and you want to have music on, by all means. One of the things I wanted people to understand is that art can be very therapeutic. If you're very mindful as you're working of the colors, depending if we were using oil paints, you'd also have a scent. You'd smell the oil and the linseed in the various oil color paints. If you're paying real close attention, you can hear the stroke, depending on the bristles of your brush, you can hear the stroke of the brush on the canvas, which is a really nice tactile kind of additional sensory. And then I like to really just enjoy the colors themselves and make that part of what I'm looking at and enjoying. So on some of my tulips, I had like an open top and it looked like you were looking in, and I used it like a dark part of the purple to make it look as though it was the inside. And some of them looked like the buds down here, like they were completely closed still. And there's no wrong answer. Your tulips are not going to hold it against you if they're all closed or if nobody has a bud. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with my tulips. I can always go back and do a little more with them later, but I think I'm going to leave them the way they are. The next thing we're going to work on, and you can go back again and play with the tulips and add some highlights and add some shadows. But the next thing we're going to work on is the stems. And I'll talk a little bit about it first. So it's a little intimidating to do a stem because you want it to be straight. So one of the things I recommend doing when I work on stained glass and I'm making cuts, our instructor, when I was learning, said, hold your breath. Hold your breath, take a deep breath, and then exhale as you go. So if you want to make a straight line, you breathe in, out for the straight line. Breathe in, out for the straight line. And we're going to work on bringing the stems right up to the tulips. Okay, so practice on your paper plate, do the breath, be mindful, and feel comfortable with pulling your green paint. We're going to mix some green and white to make the stem. So I'm going to use my palette, put some green onto my palette, scoop up some white, and make it a medium level. You don't want it to be too dark because we're going to use the straight green to go ahead and create some shading on this, on the stems and on the leaves. So I have this really pretty aqua mix, just the green and white, nothing else. I'm going to do that thing we talked about where you brush your paintbrush tips back and forth across the paint so that the edging is straight and you don't see any kind of lumps or bumps. And then to do the stems, instead of pulling up into it, you just place your brush at the bottom and go down. And start at one of your lower ones so you have a shorter line to draw and you get a feel. But you just want to be bold and decisive when you do it. Put your brush there. Don't press too hard because you'll make a really thick stem. And I have these brilliant contrasting green stems coming out from the base of my tulip. And I'm just going straight down like this. This one didn't come out so great, but you know what? We can overcompensate for that with our leaves that we'll put in. Anywhere you're not happy with how something looks, it's okay. We can cover it with our leaves. So I have one last one. I'm placing my brush and just pulling straight down. I now have 7 little stems on my tulips. And I'm going to mix more of the green and white together. So I have a nice little pool to pull from, and I'm going to start to put in some leaves. And I'm really just going to pull my brush down more on a side like this instead of straight like this. You want to hold it perpendicular to the canvas for the stems, and then you want to kind of hold it up close to sideways for the leaves. And I'm just going to start blocking in my leaves. Don't go too wide because you can always go wider, you cannot go thinner. Okay, isn't this looking beautiful? I'm going to actually turn mine upside down so that I can work upside down and not have the edge of the canvas underneath my easel. And I need a little more green and white. And I'm just mixing it, getting it to the consistency I want. And then you've got to remember after you've mixed some paint to go ahead and go side to side, cleaning all the extra lumps and bumps off so that your brush is nice and even. And I'm just going to keep putting in leaves all the way across so that the whole piece has some leaves. So I have my palette, I drag my brush back and forth across, and then I add leaves. And I'm going to be really fun, and I'm going to have 1 or 2 leaves where the leaf folds down. I'm not going to do a whole bunch, just 1 or 2, so that it gives it a little bit more dimension and fun. You want to make sure that your tulip stems go all the way to the bottom, otherwise it's going to look unfinished. And so I'm just adding in. And as you can see, I'm almost done blocking in the stems. You don't want to have every leaf the same height. Again, we don't want it to be too uniform. I'm even painting some green on the top, or in this case, really on the bottom, so that you know if it's hanging and there's people who can see underneath eye level, they see the stems wrapping all the way around in the leaves. I need a little bit more right here. I'm just going to broaden this one and make it a fat leaf. And maybe one more right here. And right here. Okay. So we have tulips and we have leaves and stems. And then we're going to highlight the edge of the stems. We're going to pick a side, left or right, and you're going to be consistent and uniform for your highlight. You don't want to have some getting a light source from one side and some getting a light source from another side. So I have just green on my brush at this point. I'm not even really washing my brush in between. I'm just scooping out paint, and I'm going to go with pure green, and I'm going to, along one side, pull up a little. You can work it in and smooth it, and you can leave some of them where it's very bold. But again, pick the left or the right side and be consistent. And the more I do, you can see it's going to leave less paint, so it's not as dark. And that's when you go back and get a little more paint off your palette in the dark green. And I'm going to do it on my stem as well. So very carefully, I'm just going to lightly on some of my stems run a green line. Okay. And you don't have to run the green line all the way to the top, just part of it. So you have this medium green, and then you're using pure green with no white added to it to give a little more definition to your leaves. You can feather it on some of them so that it blends a little, and then you can do it as a straight line on others, like a highlight. Okay, so I'm giving a little more definition to my petals. I'm sorry, to my leaves and my stems. And again, you don't want to do the same thing to each one. You want to just kind of mix it up. When I bent my leaf down, I want to put a little bit darker underneath where the bent leaf is so that it looks shadowed. Okay, so all of my leaves and all of my stems have a dark green line. I'm going to be really silly, and I'm going to randomly add a little bit of green to some of my tulips. And your purple will have dried, so this is going to mix in. You can use your fingertip or clean your brush and just do a little blending. And that will give it just a hint of whimsy. I don't know, something I think adds a little bit more depth to your piece. So we have green in the purple, and we're going to go next, and we're going to put some purple in the green. And to do that, I'm going to clean my brush off. You don't have to have it completely clean. And I'm going to start doing the same type of thing in my leaves that I did with just adding some green there. In a few spots, I'm going to go ahead and put a touch of purple. And again, if it's too bold, just stroke your brush back over and lighten it, but you'll have that hint of purple now showing. And I did a few splashes of dark purple on this one. I'll pull it up to show you where I put dark purple here, and you can see there's some green here, little touch here, here. So it's just a hint. You want to be really delicate with this. You don't want to overwhelm it and have giant purple and green stripes, but you want to incorporate both colors into both areas. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm working it. If your brush is tugging, don't forget water is your friend. Go and add a little bit of water. It just makes for a really nice contrast. These are contrasting colors on the color scale, purple and green. So this is why I think this piece works so nicely, because you're inherently using what nature has already shown us. Color opposites. I'm going to take some of the blue and purple, well, the bluish purple that I mixed the green and the purple together, and I'm going to mix some of that and have that as a dark blue here, and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to add a little bit of that in some places. And again, wet my brush if I need to soften it up. And don't be afraid, you can use your fingers too. I really love the purplish, bluish hue that comes from mixing these two colors together. I'm throwing a little bit of that up in here too. Okay, so very similar from my other. I did add an extra flower. I'm going to go back and I'm going to use just a teeny tiny bit of white on my brush. So that you do want to make sure that your brush is clean. And I'm just going to add a little bit of highlight in a couple spots. And then I think I'm going to soften some of the edges on my leaves. I have a couple hard edges on my leaves, so I'm just touching my brush in the water to help me blend a little. I can hear it thundering. I'm not sure where everybody else is, but here at the library, I can hear some thunder going on outside. So what better to celebrate the arrival of spring on a thundery, rainy day than to be creating these beautiful tulips? If we can't be outside enjoying springtime, we can bring it inside. Okay, I'm taking a look to try and see. I don't want to overdo. I don't want to add too much if I don't need it. You are welcome to sign your work. If you're worried about trying to sign your work, one of the things that is a really nice little trick is to just use a black Sharpie marker, wait for the piece to dry completely, and then you can go back in and take care of business with the Sharpie instead of trying to paint. It is not easy with either of the brushes that we provided you with. Both the sponge brush and the angle brush will not do great if you're trying to sign a name, just as an FYI. One little tip, I'm looking at the stems on my tulips, and by the top, I want to make sure that they are the same thickness instead of having it narrow, like, let me get a, sometimes the stems are going like this and they're kind of creating like a little V at the top. If you can, with a steady hand, brace your arm if you need to, go back and just try and make sure they're the same thickness at the top of each tulip, not being so that it looks like you didn't finish painting the stem correctly. I'm thickening some of them up because some of them look like they're too delicate to hold the tulip head. So I'm just basically touching it to one side or the other to make it equal thickness. So it's a pretty simple design. There's no right or wrong. If you're not happy with something, let it dry and you can go back over with your paint and put in some color on top to get it to where you prefer it to be. But the nice thing about this is there's no right or wrong. We're not trying to make botanical tulip drawings. We're trying to make spring tulips, sort of impressionistic and really simple and sweet. I hope everybody is happy with their work.